Today we're going to make fresh pasta. We'll start with the dough, obviously. So what we have is a combination of semolina and double O flour here. You can use kind of any ratio, really will work. This is a pretty foolproof recipe. What I have measured out is exactly 300 grams of flour. I did about 50-50 semolina to double O flour, which is a very, very fine flour. And then I have 2 whole eggs and 3 egg yolks, and then added just enough water to this mixture to equal exactly 185 grams, and 2 tablespoons of salt. Traditionally, with making fresh pasta dough, it's made by hand. I'm gonna start by using a food processor. It just quickens the process and is a little less messy. If you don't have a food processor, the idea of doing it by hand from start to finish, and we will switch to using our hands just after we bring the dough together, but you'll pour your flour out into a nice mound. You'll use your fingers to draw a circle and basically make a well in that mound, and then you'll pour your liquid into that well. You can start even with just half of the egg yolk mixture at first, and then using your fingers or a fork, you'll very, very slowly kind of start to work the egg around until you're just barely drawing in the edges of the mound of flour, and eventually it will come together. So really it's much quicker process if we just put it into a food processor. You could also use a standing mixer if that works better for you. I prefer a food processor. Salt. Supposed to bring the dough together, so it's important to just pulse it. I think it's come together enough. Maybe a little bit more. I want it to kind of draw a little bit more from the sides. Maybe I'll even I'm going to turn this mixture out onto my board. Now it's time to start kneading. This is where the work comes. We're going to knead this dough for 10 minutes straight. Then I'm going to add just a touch of double O flour, just a sprinkling. And the process definitely doesn't get easier. That's expected. It's difficult to get this gluten to form by hand, but that means it's a good dough. Finally starting to see a little bit of gluten development. Not tearing as easily. We're getting there. Alright, we are finally at the point where we're ready to let our dough rest. And it is important to let your dough rest for at least 30 minutes. We worked really, really hard to get that gluten developed. So we need to give that gluten some time to relax before we try and roll it out, particularly because we're going to be rolling it out by hand. If you start to attack your dough too early and it just keeps bouncing back, you need to let it rest for longer. So 30 minutes at a minimum. You also have to make sure that it is tightly wrapped because it'll dry out if it's not wrapped. So we're gonna let this guy relax for 30 minutes. So our dough has been resting for just over 30 minutes. I've cut it into quarters because I'm gonna attack it in pieces, and it's very important to make sure that when you're not dealing with dough, you keep it wrapped or it's gonna dry out and it's not gonna be something that you can work with. You have to work with it very fast. And that's gonna be a little tricky when you're rolling it out by hand, but it's just gonna require a certain amount of muscle, just like the rest of the process. You wanna get your dough paper thin. When you're doing it by hand, it's a little bit trickier, but it's just a matter of elbow grease and patience. Do like to do this fold the edges in once, just so that I can have nice straight sides, and I'm trying to get it into long strips. Typically, if I was rolling this out using a pasta roller, then at this point I would start feeding it into that pasta machine. We are the pasta machine. And if it tears a little bit, it's okay. We can cut all that stuff off. We will cut all that stuff off. So, we're going to attack this a little bit differently when we're making noodles. And I think we'll go with like a tagliatelle. So first, I am just gonna trim those edges just a touch. I don't know what regular is. No. Next, what I'm gonna do is like really delicately roll it on itself, and then I have to cut like quickly and deliberately because I'm not trying to press it down too much and like get the layers to stick together. I'm trying to just you could go thicker if you wanted with pepper bell. And just grab the little tails. You want to do this relatively quickly because the longer it sits on itself. Probably could have done some a touch thinner still even. This is just going to be a little bit more toothsome for sure. That's okay. Okay. So you put it into a little pile. You could put it onto a sheet tray, put a cloth over the top of it, and then into the freezer until you're ready to use it. All right, so another type of pasta is dried pasta, which we're going to cook now. I have a nice deep pot filled with water that's at a rolling boil. Place it in. After a few seconds, eventually it'll start to bend some, and you'll be able to coerce the other end of it into the pot. Don't be scared. If you are scared, you can just push it down with a pair of tongs or a wooden spoon. It's gonna cook. You wanna keep it on that high heat. It's gonna cook for about 5 minutes. Technically it says about 6 to 8 minutes, but we're gonna wanna cook it just under al dente because we're going to be letting it carry over cook and working with a few different quick pasta sauces. So we don't want to take it to completely cooked. We don't want to take it to the point where it's completely cooked. All right, so our pasta has been cooking for about 5 minutes. We're ready to strain it. Now, if you're less confident with your skills, you could run this under cool water and it slows that carryover cooking process. It doesn't stop it completely, but it slows it enough where, you know, you have a little bit of time. But the problem with running it under cool water is that it does get rid of all the starch, and that starch on the outside of the pasta is really going to be help in making the sauce stick to it. So I am going to just challenge myself to work quickly. And I'm just adding a little bit of olive oil and agitating it. And I'm going to put it onto a sheet pan so it's in a single layer. Olive oil. Pulled it just before that 5-minute timer, so it was just shy of 5 minutes. Putting the oil on it so that it doesn't stick together. Okay, now we're gonna move on. All right, next we're gonna do a Cacio e Pepe, which is really simple. It's just an emulsification of pasta water, a little bit of butter, and Parmesan cheese with salt and a bunch of pepper. All right, so I'm just gonna start by adding a little bit of pasta water. You want your pan to be hot. Add some cold butter. And agitating, kind of whisking it in with my spoon. Making sure the heat doesn't get so high, but really it's emulsifying that butter and pasta water together. You can actually see that it's starting to get some body. I haven't even added the Parmesan cheese yet. Now I will add my pasta and water. Pasta's warmed through. A little bit more of that water. Out. A little more water. Not too much more. And then I'm going to start adding the cheese and the seasoning. If I was going by flavor and not by tradition, I would add a little bit of lemon juice in here too, just to cut all this fat. Traditionally, that is not something that you'll see. So we'll keep it real traditional. You could get untraditional and add lemon juice and lemon zest. Depends on you. Black pepper. I'm taking it off the heat now just because it was starting to tighten up just a little bit too much. Add a little bit more water. Keep it off the heat now. Parm. A little bit of butter. A little bit of olive oil. Pepper. And we're going to be ready to plate it. Okay, I'm just adding just a touch more water just to make sure that it is ready to plate. Tongs. And pour my sauce right over the top. little bit more of that sauce. And it is sticking just a touch to the bottom of the pan. It's super easy to get it back up again. Tiny bit more. A little more black pepper. Drizzle of olive oil just to finish. And a Cacio Pepe. Okay, last one. We're going to be using Aglio e Olio, olive oil, and garlic. And so this is less about that emulsification between pasta water, butter, and Parmesan, and more about an emulsification between garlic, olive oil, a little bit of seasoning, and that pasta water. We're going to start by sauteing some garlic and some finely chopped anchovies and olives. That anchovy is not really going to impart fish flavor like you might expect. In fact, it's just going to cook down and really give some nice umami to the dish. Not looking to toast that garlic. I don't want caramelization, but I am hoping that the anchovies will kind of melt into that oil. Okay, this is a quick sauce. I'm going to add a good pinch crushed up pepper flake. I'm going to add my pasta. Into the water it goes. More of that water for sure. Notice my heat is now off. I can kind of build my sauce using the residual heat from the pan. Pulling out that pasta water, agitating the pan. More pasta water out. Water is your friend. Okay, let's get that heat back. Incorporating a little bit more fat, water. Remember, it's that emulsification process. So, a little bit of Parmesan cheese. After that, more water. Constantly agitating. Pinch of Parmesan cheese, maybe a pinch and a half. Pinch of salt. Squeeze a lemon. If it starts to look like it's getting too greasy, add water. You want it to look creamy, and that water is going to be the key to keeping it looking creamy and not greasy. Okay. Almost at that point, we're ready to finish it and add fresh herbs. A good pinch of chiffonade parsley. Nice slug of olive oil. A little bit more pasta water. And we're ready to go. Emulsification process without butter is a little more tricky, so you definitely have to fuss with it just a touch more. Maybe add more water, but it should come together. Always using gravity. Some finely chopped parsley. Some more Parmesan cheese. And then with this one, really healthy drizzle of olive oil. Oil happens to be everything. And here we have an aglio e olio. And Amatriciana sauce. Now, with an Amatriciana sauce, tonight we're going to be using bacon, but more traditionally in Italy they use pork jowl or guanciale, which is a little bit sweeter and less smoky than bacon. So it definitely lends itself a different flavor. You could also substitute pancetta. So tonight we're doing bacon. Obviously that's gonna give it a more smoky flavor. You wanna make sure that your pan's warm before you put that bacon in. And then put one piece in to test it out. If it doesn't sizzle, pull it back out. This is going to be a relatively quick tomato sauce. I'm using a pomodoro sauce. If you were using just canned chopped tomato, you'll want to simmer this sauce for anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes, even up to an hour, as long as you keep your heat low enough. And as it reduces, you can add a little bit of water here and there. But you will want to kind of cook that raw tomato flavor out. I've already done that, so I'm using a regular tomato sauce. Just a very basic one. So I put some olive oil in the pan and I'm going to add my bacon, which is chopped. Make it much easier to render crispy. Make sure it's baking up. Cooking evenly. Looking to render it completely. You see it's golden on the onion. I really think the key to making sure that it cooks evenly is that you're constantly agitating the pan. See that bacon's not shallow frying. And we're going to use that fat. It's actually going to emulsify with the tomato sauce. So resist the urge to strain it out. Pork fat and tomato is a really lovely flavor combination. Okay, it's starting to get crispy now, which is what we were looking for. I'm going to add some small diced onion. Turn my heat down to medium. I want to make sure that we're cooking these onions until translucent. Also going to add a teaspoon of fresh oregano. So you want your temperature high enough where you're still sauteing those onions at the very least. You don't want your bacon to get burnt, so you can't have that heat back up too high. So it's definitely going to be one of those situations where you have to stay engaged and be adjusting that heat, aware of what's going on in your pan. These onions to get cooked through. And again, the key to them cooking evenly is that we're careful to make sure we cut them evenly, and then we're constantly agitating that pan. That the onions have really soaked in a lot of the grease, which is what we're looking for. And the rest is going to emulsify into the tomato sauce. So we are still sauteing the vegetables, caramelizing them really at this point, just very lightly caramelizing. Starting to get translucent, which is nice. That's what we were looking for, getting a little bit of caramelization evenly, which is good. Point now where add a couple good pinches of garlic. I wanted to wait until those onions were really cooked down pretty far before I added the garlic, because the last thing you want is for your garlic to burn. Put a small pinch of crushed red pepper flake. If you like more spice, you could certainly add more. Making sure that garlic and red pepper flake get nicely toasted before I add any liquid to the pan. At this point, all the liquid that we see is actually fat still, which is what we want, because we're still trying to make sure we cook those onions. They're where we want them. Add a small amount of dry white wine. You can see how that white wine is actually starting to emulsify with the fat already. That would make a delicious sauce in itself for a pasta. If mount it with a little bit of butter and hit it with some herbs, and that would be pretty delicious. We're gonna add our tomato sauce right here. We're gonna add more. I just wanted to make sure I didn't add too much. You can always add more. It's much harder to take stuff out. I think we'll probably end up adding a little bit, but let's see what it looks like. I can turn my heat up at this point because I don't want it to be spitting up all over the place and getting all over my stove, but I do want to see a nice simmer. Start to get this to reduce down a bit. Yeah, I'm not going to add the rest of it. Right where we want to be with tomato, and you can see all of that fat has now completely emulsified in, and part of it has emulsified in because I've been careful to kind of work it in, just agitating the pan. Now that it's coming up to a simmer, I'm going to adjust my heat down to medium. We're going to let it simmer for a few minutes. We're also going to simmer just for a few minutes before we add any fresh herbs. You can simmer this anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes, maybe even up to an hour. If it starts to get really thick, again, you'll want to add just a little bit of water, just so that it doesn't get so thick that it's, it's not a sauce anymore. Eventually, we are going to marry this with pasta and use a little bit of water to thin it out, so keep that in mind. Okay, so this guy's been cooking down, reducing low for a good 10 minutes. I can't stress enough the importance of keeping the heat just low enough. You really don't want to rush that process. There's a lot of sugars, natural sugars in tomato, and when you get too aggressive with your heat, it really is an off-putting flavor. Same goes for garlic, same goes for onions, so you want to be gentle with that reduction process. We're where we want to be at this point now. I'm going to start to incorporate some more fresh herbs. I rarely hit basil with a knife. I usually choose to either leave it whole or tear it into sauces. Sometimes I'll even sizzle it in a little olive oil first. That kind of blooms the flavors. For this sauce, we're just going to tear some in and give it a stir. If it starts to look a touch dry, you can add a little bit of olive oil. I'm going to resist the urge to add any water yet, because once I add my pasta to my sauce, which I am at a rolling boil, so I am going to drop my pasta, making sure that I'm agitating the noodles so they're not sticking together, dropping them into my water. And if you don't have a little basket like this, it's no big deal. You can just fish them out with a slotted spoon or some tongs. Give myself plenty of time, because it's going to take a few minutes for that to cook. Relatively fast with fresh pasta, a lot faster than dried, but we also don't want to pull it too early. I'm going to use my tongs just to agitate them a little bit. They're looking nice. They're not sticking together at all. It's okay that this is starting to look a little chunky like this. In fact, that's what you're looking for with the sauce, because we're going to finish it with a few ingredients that will cream it out. This is a rustic, slightly more rustic tomato sauce. You can see all that fat now has absorbed into the tomatoes. Let's give this guy a taste. almost there. We have 20, 30 more seconds. And we're ready to go on this. Okay. Turn my heat down to medium here, and we're ready with this pasta. Get a little bit of that water. Maybe even a little bit more, we'll see. And it's okay if it's a little bit extra sauce. Not all the sauce needs to go into my serving bowl. I finish with just a little bit of cold butter, maybe a little less than that. Some Parmesan cheese, pinch of parsley, nice drizzle of olive oil, and potentially maybe even a little bit more pasta water. Let's see what it looks like as that butter melts down. The butter really helps the sauce to emulsify, really stick to the pasta. I don't think we need any pasta water. Okay, we're ready to plate. I have a ring mold here. I like using a ring mold when I make pasta, when I plate pastas, just because it kind of holds it together in a pile, and then I'll lift the ring mold and it'll fall naturally. If you don't have one, it's not the end of the world. You could use something like a quart container, like this. You can cut the bottom off, plate out of that, use it as a ring mold the same way. But it's not necessary, really. It's just for trying to keep it intact. And it's okay if it falls out of it slightly. You can always wipe it. Probably gonna keep it small. And while I can wipe that out completely. We're gonna add more sauce eventually, but for now. And it's gonna start to fall as we add sauce. That's what we want. We don't want it to look completely placed. I'm gonna add just the tiniest bit of pasta water to this now, just to loosen it up. A little bit more pasta water, because it has tightened up quite a bit and cooled down a touch. And a touch more butter. Loosen it up just a touch. Parmesan, chopped parsley. Finish it with a generous drizzle of olive oil, always. There we go. It's Amatriciana sauce. Okay, so we're going to begin our carbonara. We're going to start with the classic carbonara. We're going to start with bacon and a little bit of olive oil. More traditionally, you might use guanciale, pork jowl, or polpetta. Bacon's really tasty too. You want to make sure you're breaking it up really good. Add a teaspoon of olive oil to kind of get it started. And if you put a lot of fat, it's going to render off. Want to make sure that we're constantly moving it around in the oil so that it cooks nice and evenly. Looks like it's starting to cook too quick. Just turn it down. Just looking to get it to a nice golden brown, rendered crispy. While that's going on, we can also mix our egg yolk and Parmesan mixture. We have 2 whole egg yolks and about 3/4 of a cup of Parmesan. You can do a combination of Parmesan and Pecorino Romano. I prefer Parmigiano Reggiano, so I just do it with just that. That pecorino will give it a little bit more of an aggressive kind of bite, and a little bit of acidity. So definitely a different flavor profile. I'm going to whip those together. Okay, go back over to my bacon. It's okay if I'm getting a little caramelization because I'm going to deglaze. Back over to my eggs. I want to make sure they're totally whipped up. Caramelized. And now I'm just going to throw whole garlic clove in. I'm going to end up fishing him out. Just looking to flavor the oil a touch. Now, I'm going to add something a little bit untraditional. Some peas that I glazed with just a little bit of pasta water and butter. Now, I'm going to turn my heat off because I don't want these peas to cook so much that they start to turn anything. Now you can see that garlic clove is really starting to infuse the oil. Just pull it out. Add a tiny bit of pasta water. Turn the heat off. Drop it in the water just to rewarm it. Pull it out. Turn my heat back on to medium. Using medium low. Get a little bit of that water. That's it. Give it a toss. Maybe even a little bit more of that water. More of that water. You want to have a good amount of water. The key is definitely to agitate this pan as soon as you add a little bit more pasta water. A little more. At this point, my heat is off, and that's okay because I'm just trying to kind of make sure that I am tempering those eggs, not applying too much heat. And now I'm at the point where I can add a little bit of some Parmesan cheese, some olive oil, and and a good amount of black pepper, a pinch of salt, and untraditional little squeeze of lemon to cut some of the fat. You can really see how creamy it looks. Okay, we're ready to plate. Not something that is too forgiving. So, I like to start high and let it fall as it wants to. I won't pour all the sauce on top, just some. Get a few more of those peas so it's a little slotted. Just a little bit more. The sauce is getting a little tight. I'm going to thin it out with just a touch of water and a squeeze of olive oil. Okay. And a pinch of Parmesan, pinch of parsley, and drizzle of olive oil. And one final plate wipe. And we have a pasta carbonara.